The crystal wine glass in Victoria's manicured hand caught the light from the Fairmont Copley Plaza's chandelier as she stood to address the 250 guests at my son's wedding reception. I was 30 feet away, quietly emptying champagne flutes into my custodian's trash cart, trying to remain invisible in my Navy maintenance uniform. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Victoria began, her voice carrying that particular confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. The room quieted instantly, senators, judges, Boston's old money elite all turning their attention to my new daughter-in-law. Michael and I are so grateful to be surrounded by such accomplished people. Leaders. Innovators. The very best Boston has to offer. I continued my work, moving between cocktail tables with practiced efficiency. After 8 years as a night janitor at Massachusetts General Hospital, I'd mastered the art of being present but unnoticed. "It's important on a day like this," Victoria continued, her tone shifting subtly, "to recognize that society has natural hierarchies. Some people are born to lead. Others are meant to serve. Both are necessary, but let's not pretend they're equal." My hands stilled on the trash cart handle. Across the ballroom, my son Michael's face had gone pale. Victoria's eyes found me in my uniform, and she pointed directly at me. "That man there, for instance. That's Michael's father. He's just a janitor. Never accomplished anything of significance. Never built anything that mattered." Every head in the room turned toward me. I felt the weight of 250 pairs of eyes, governors, hospital administrators, Harvard professors, all watching the janitor being publicly dismissed by his own daughter-in-law. "Some people create," Victoria continued, emboldened by the attention. "Others clean up after the creators. That's simply the way the world works. My family built hospitals, endowed universities, shaped policy. His father empties bedpans and mops floors. There's no shame in that, but let's not confuse service with significance." I set down my trash bag with careful dignity and met her eyes across that vast ballroom. The silence was suffocating. Then I simply asked, "Would anyone like fresh towels in the restroom?" Victoria smiled, a small, triumphant curve of her lips. She'd made her point. Put me in my place in front of everyone who mattered in her world. But then a young doctor near the bar suddenly stood up, staring at the television mounted above the bottles. PBS was playing a medical documentary, and his finger was pointing between the screen and me. "Wait," he said, his voice rising with disbelief. "Wait. That's Dr. Robert Chen. That's the Dr. Robert Chen." Victoria's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor, the sound echoing through the stunned silence like breaking bones. That moment changed everything forever. Before I tell you how my own daughter-in-law nearly destroyed my son's wedding by humiliating me in front of Boston's elite, if you want to hear more true stories about family, dignity, and the triumph of character over cruelty, hit that subscribe button now. Because what happened next shocked everyone in that room, including me. I came to America from Taiwan 40 years ago with $300, a medical degree my parents had sacrificed everything to give me, and dreams bigger than the cramped apartment I could afford in Cambridge. I was 24 years old and spoke broken English, but I understood the universal language of hard work. My wife Lynn came 6 months later. We were married in a courthouse with 2 strangers as witnesses, then celebrated with dumplings from a food cart because that's all we could afford. She was a nurse. I was starting my residency at Massachusetts General Hospital. We were poor, exhausted, and completely happy. Michael was born 3 years later, in the same hospital where I'd eventually spent 15 years as chief of transplant immunology. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Those early years were brutal. I worked 100-hour weeks in research labs, developing protocols for organ transplant rejection while Lynn raised Michael in our 1-bedroom apartment. She'd bring him to the hospital at midnight so I could hold him for 20 minutes between experiments. My son's first words weren't "Mama" or "Dada," they were "Be careful," because Lynn was always warning him not to touch the equipment in my lab. By the time Michael was 10, I'd published 70 research papers and developed what would become known as the Chin Protocol, a revolutionary approach to preventing organ rejection that's still used in every major transplant center worldwide. The New England Journal of Medicine called it the most significant advancement in transplant medicine in 20 years. I won awards. Got tenure at Harvard Medical School. Lynn and I finally bought a house in Cambridge, nothing fancy, but it had a yard where Michael could play. We thought we'd made it. We thought the struggle was over. Then, when Michael was 17 and applying to colleges, Lynn started forgetting things. Small things at first, where she'd put her keys, what she'd had for breakfast. We joked about it. Getting old, she'd say with that beautiful smile I'd fallen in love with 25 years earlier. But it wasn't old age. It was early onset Alzheimer's, diagnosed 3 weeks before Michael's high school graduation. She was 57 years old. The disease moved fast. Within a year, she couldn't remember my name some days. Within 2 years, she needed full-time care. I took a leave of absence from Harvard, then another, then finally resigned. My research could wait. Awards could wait. My wife couldn't. I spent 3 years caring for Lynn at home. Feeding her, bathing her, reading to her from books she'd loved even though she couldn't follow the stories anymore. Michael was in law school by then, calling every day but unable to help much. I told him to focus on his studies, that I had everything under control. I didn't. I was drowning. Watching the woman I loved disappear while her body remained was the hardest thing I've ever endured. But I'd do it again. Every moment mattered, even the ones where she looked at me like I was a stranger. Lynn died 3 years ago, on a Tuesday morning in November. Michael flew home from his law firm in Boston. We buried her on a gray day that matched how the world felt without her. After the funeral, I couldn't go back to research. The lab felt empty. The prestige felt meaningless. I needed work that didn't require the mental energy that research demanded, work where I could show up, do the job, and go home without carrying the weight of life and death decisions. So I became a janitor. Night shift at the same hospital where I'd once given lectures to medical students. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't care. The work was honest, the hours were quiet, and I could think about Lynn without anyone asking me to solve complex immunological problems. Michael knew I worked at the hospital. I'd told him I'd taken a position in facilities management after Lynn died, which was technically true. He assumed I meant administration. I never corrected him. Why burden my son with worry about his father's career choices? 2 years ago, Michael called with exciting news. He'd met someone, Victoria Ashworth, from one of Boston's oldest families. Her great-grandfather had endowed the surgical wing at Mass General. Her father was a prominent thoracic surgeon. Her mother sat on the boards of half the cultural institutions in New England. "She's amazing, Dad," Michael said, his voice full of hope. "Really special. I think you're going to love her." Our first dinner together was at a restaurant in Beacon Hill that required reservations months in advance. Victoria arrived in a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, carrying a handbag I recognized from the luxury stores I'd never entered. "Michael talks about you constantly," she said, her handshake brief and cool. "He says you work at the hospital." "In what capacity?" "Facilities management," I replied, which was technically accurate. "Oh." Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "How practical." The dinner was polite but strained. She asked questions that felt like interrogations. Where had I gone to college? National Taiwan University. Her nose wrinkled slightly, clearly not Harvard or Yale. Where did I live? Cambridge, near Porter Square. The wrong part of Cambridge, her expression suggested. When the check came, I reached for it. "Please, let me." "That's not necessary," Victoria interrupted, her tone suggesting it would be inappropriate for me to pay. "Michael handles these things now." 6 months later, they were engaged. The engagement party was at Victoria's parents' Beacon Hill mansion, 3 stories of old money and older furniture, where every painting had a plaque and every conversation referenced people I'd never heard of. I wore my best suit, which Victoria's mother eyed with poorly concealed disdain. When someone asked what I did, Victoria smoothly interjected, "Robert's retired from hospital work. Isn't that right?" The lie of omission hung in the air like expensive perfume. Later that evening, Victoria pulled me aside into her father's study. "About the wedding," she began, closing the door. "It's going to be quite large. Very formal. My family's inviting the governor, several senators, judges. The cream of Boston society. That sounds wonderful. Michael must be so happy." "Yes, well." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Given the guest list, I'm wondering if it might be better if you, perhaps skip the rehearsal dinner. It's going to be very political, very connected. Michael's background is already being discussed." The words hit like a slap. "Michael's background? You mean me?" "I mean that my family moves in certain circles where presentation matters. Where connections and pedigree are important. You understand." "I understand that I raised Michael alone after his mother got sick. I understand that I worked 3 jobs to put him through college debt-free. I understand that he's the man you're marrying because of the values I taught him." Victoria's expression hardened. "Don't make this about sentiment. This is about reality. About what's best for Michael's future in my world." I left the party early, my heart heavy with the realization that my son was marrying someone who saw me as an embarrassment to be managed rather than a father to be honored. 1 week before the wedding, Victoria called and asked to meet me at a coffee shop near her office. She arrived carrying a manila envelope, which she placed on the table between us like evidence in a trial. "I'm going to be direct," she said. "My wedding is going to be attended by people who matter. Senators. Judges. CEOs. People who will shape Michael's career trajectory for decades. I'm aware. Then you're aware that your presence would be problematic." She slid the envelope toward me. "There's $50,000 in here. Cash. I'm asking you not to attend the wedding." The cafe noise faded. I stared at her, searching for any sign of shame or discomfort. There was none. "You're offering me money to skip my son's wedding?" "I'm offering you compensation for the discomfort of making a difficult choice. Think of it as recognition that this day isn't about you, it's about Michael's future. A future that requires certain optics. And if I refuse?" Her smile was ice. "Then don't blame me for what happens. I can't control what my guests might think or say when they see a janitor at a wedding where governors and judges are in attendance." I pushed the envelope back across the table. "I'm not ashamed of who I am or what I do. I'll be at my son's wedding." Victoria's eyes hardened. "Then you'll live with the consequences." I tried to do this the easy way. I should have told Michael about that conversation. But I didn't want to put him in the position of choosing between his father and his bride days before their wedding. So I made a different choice. I called my friend Tom Sullivan, the maintenance director at Mass General who'd become like a brother over 8 years of night shifts. "Tom, I need a favor. Can you get me on the cleaning crew for a private event at the Fairmont Copley Plaza?" "What kind of event?" "My son's wedding. His fiancée doesn't want me there as a guest. But she can't stop me from working it." There was a long silence. Then Tom said, "I know the facilities manager there. Owed me some favors. Consider it done. If Victoria didn't want me as father of the groom, I'd be there as the help. Either way, I wouldn't miss seeing my son get married." The morning of Michael's wedding, I woke at 5 a.m. in my Cambridge apartment, unable to sleep. On my nightstand sat a framed photo of Lynn holding baby Michael, both of them laughing at something I'd said behind the camera. "Wish you were here for this," I whispered to her smile. Our boy's getting married today. I made coffee and reviewed the plan. Tom had called the night before to confirm everything was set. You're on the custodial crew, 2 p.m. arrival. Facilities manager thinks you're filling in for someone who called in sick. Wedding starts at 6, reception at 7. You'll be assigned to cocktail hour and ballroom maintenance. Did anyone try to interfere? I asked, remembering Victoria's threat. Funny you should mention that. Tom's voice carried an edge of anger. Got a call yesterday from someone offering $75,000 cash if I'd refuse your request. Didn't even leave a name, just an account number to wire confirmation. My chest tightened. What did you say? I hung up. Money can't buy everyone, Robert. Especially not friendship. He paused. This Victoria sounds like a real piece of work. She's about to be my daughter-in-law. Let's hope marriage to Michael teaches her something about character. At 1:30 p.m., I dressed in the custodian uniform Tom had provided, navy blue work pants, matching shirt with Fairmont staff embroidered on the pocket, black non-slip shoes. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a 64-year-old immigrant who'd chosen dignity over pride, presence over recognition. I packed a suit in a garment bag, just in case. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, Lynn's philosophy. The Fairmont Copley Plaza rose before me like a monument to old Boston money. Ornate facade, gilded entrance, doormen in uniforms that probably cost more than mine. I walked past the main entrance to the service entry, where a facilities manager named Derek checked his clipboard. You're the fill-in Tom sent. Robert Chen. Yes, sir. Great. We're short-handed tonight. Big society wedding, 250 guests, bride's family is old Boston money so everything needs to be perfect. He handed me a radio and assignment sheet. You'll handle cocktail hour in the grand ballroom, empty trash, keep surfaces clean, restock restrooms. Stay invisible, move efficiently. These people don't want to notice the help. Understood. The grand ballroom took my breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, each probably worth more than I'd earned in a year of research. Marble floors gleamed under soft lighting. White roses and orchids cascaded from centerpieces that must have cost thousands each. Round tables draped in silk surrounded a dance floor that reflected light like still water. This was where Michael would marry Victoria in 3 hours. I'd watch from the shadows, invisible in my uniform, while my son pledged his life to a woman who tried to buy my absence. Other staff moved through final preparations, florists adjusting arrangements, caterers setting up bars, sound technicians testing microphones. I positioned my custodial cart near a service corridor with a clear view of the altar where Michael would stand. At 5 o'clock, guests began arriving. I recognized several faces from television: Massachusetts Governor Patricia Walsh, Federal Judge Raymond Morrison, Senator Thomas Hayes. They moved through cocktail hour with the easy confidence of people who'd never questioned their place in the world. I emptied champagne flutes into my trash bin, wiped down high-top tables, restocked paper towels in restrooms. The uniform made me invisible. Guests looked through me, their conversations continuing as if I were furniture. Near the bar, 2 doctors discussed a transplant case. The Chen protocol saved her life, one said. Without it, she'd have rejected the kidney within months. I moved past them, emptying their used napkins into my bag. They never glanced my way. A hospital administrator I vaguely recognized was telling a colleague, "We're expanding the Chen transplant pavilion. Another $20 million endowment." I wiped down their table, invisible. Senator Hayes discussed healthcare policy with a Harvard Medical School dean. "We need more researchers like Robert Chen. His testimony changed how we fund medical research." I refilled their water glasses. Neither man noticed. The irony was almost funny. Here I was, cleaning up after people discussing my life's work, while wearing a uniform that made me disappear from their perception entirely. At 5:30, the ceremony began. I watched from the service hallway as Michael stood at the altar in his tuxedo, looking nervous and happy. Victoria appeared at the ballroom entrance in a dress that probably cost more than a car, carrying orchids that matched the massive arrangements throughout the room. My son looked so much like Lynn in that moment, her eyes, her gentle smile. I felt her absence like a physical weight. She should have been here, in the front row, crying happy tears. Instead, I stood in a janitor's uniform 30 feet away, watching through a crack in the doorway as our son got married without either of his parents beside him. They exchanged vows. Victoria's voice was clear and confident. Michael's trembled slightly with emotion. When they kissed, the guests erupted in applause, and I felt my throat tighten with pride and sadness in equal measure. The ceremony ended, and guests moved into cocktail hour while the ballroom was reset for dinner. I returned to my cart, ready for the reception shift. Derek checked in via radio, "Robert, you're assigned to ballroom maintenance during dinner service. Keep trash cleared, respond to any spills, stay out of sight during toasts." Copy that. Dinner was served at 7, multiple courses that I glimpsed while emptying trash from the kitchen, lobster bisque, beef tenderloin, elaborate desserts that looked like art. The guests ate and drank, their conversations creating a hum of privilege and power. Michael and Victoria sat at the head table, flanked by her parents. Victoria's father, Dr. Richard Ashworth, prominent thoracic surgeon, looked exactly like the old-money Boston patriarch he was, silver hair, expensive suit, expression of perpetual judgment. Her mother, Catherine, wore pearls and disappointment in equal measure. Michael kept glancing around the room, his expression troubled. Was he looking for me? Did he expect me to be here despite Victoria's attempts to exclude me? I stayed near the service corridor, out of sight but present. That was enough. At 8 o'clock, after dinner plates were cleared, Victoria stood with her wine glass. The room quieted instantly, all attention turning toward the bride preparing to give her toast. I positioned my cart near the bar, ready to continue working while she spoke. Just another piece of furniture in her perfectly orchestrated evening. But Victoria had other plans for me. Victoria tapped her crystal wine glass with a silver spoon, the delicate sound cutting through the dinner conversation like a knife. 250 faces turned toward the head table, toward my new daughter-in-law standing in her $30,000 dress, ready to address Boston's elite. I continued working near the bar, positioning empty glasses on my cart with quiet efficiency. The uniform made me part of the scenery, present but invisible, exactly as Derek had instructed. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Victoria began, her voice warm and gracious. "Michael and I are overwhelmed by the love and support in this room. To share this moment with such extraordinary people, leaders, innovators, people who truly shape our world, it means everything to us." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Governor Walsh smiled from her table. Senator Hayes nodded approvingly. These were Victoria's people, and she commanded their attention effortlessly. I moved between tables, collecting used napkins and champagne flutes. Near the windows, two venture capitalists were discussing biotech investments. "The immunosuppressant market is exploding since the Chen Protocol standardized transplant procedures," one said. "Revolutionary stuff." I wiped down their table, invisible to their conversation about my life's work. "It's important on a day like this," Victoria continued, her tone shifting subtly, "to reflect on what brings us together. Excellence. Achievement. The pursuit of greatness that distinguishes those who lead from those who simply exist." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat beside her. I caught his profile, jaw tight, eyes worried. He sensed something coming, even if he couldn't name it yet. At the bar, a young cardiac surgeon was telling his date about a transplant case. "We used the Chen Protocol, obviously. It's gospel. The guy literally wrote the textbook on transplant immunology." I refilled the ice bucket behind them, unnoticed. Victoria's speech continued, her confidence building with each word. "We live in a world with natural hierarchies. Some people are born to create, to build, to transform society. Others are meant to serve those visions, to facilitate the work of greatness without achieving it themselves. The room grew quieter. Several guests exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't a typical wedding toast anymore, it was becoming something else, something uncomfortable. Both roles are necessary, Victoria said, her voice taking on a harder edge. But let's not pretend they're equal. Let's not confuse service with significance or humility with achievement. I set down my trash bag and straightened, some instinct telling me to pay attention. Michael's face had gone pale. Victoria's parents sat rigid, her mother's expression unreadable. Take this man, for instance. Victoria's manicured hand extended, finger pointing directly at me across the ballroom. Every head turned. 250 pairs of eyes found the janitor in the navy uniform, holding a trash bag near the bar. That's Michael's father, Victoria announced, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. Robert Chen. He's just a janitor. Works the night shift at a hospital, emptying bedpans and mopping floors. The silence was absolute. I felt the weight of all those stares, senators, judges, Harvard professors, Boston's most powerful families, all looking at the help being identified and dismissed by the bride herself. He never accomplished anything of significance, Victoria continued, emboldened by the attention. Never built anything that mattered. Never contributed to the world in any meaningful way. A man who peaked early, if he peaked at all, and spent decades in decline. Michael stood abruptly. Victoria, stop. Sit down, Michael. Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. Your guests deserve honesty, not sentiment. He remained standing, torn between his bride and his father, frozen by the social impossibility of the moment. Some people create, Victoria said, addressing the room like a lecturer at a podium. They innovate, build institutions, shape policy, heal the sick, teach the next generation. My family built hospitals. My father has saved thousands of lives through his surgical innovations. My mother serves on boards that fund medical research. She paused, letting the contrast build. And then there are people like Michael's father. People who clean up after the creators. Who empty the trash and scrub the toilets and stock the paper towels. Necessary work, certainly. But let's not confuse necessity with nobility or service with success. I set down my trash bag with careful precision. My hands were steady, though my heart hammered against my ribs. Around the room, guests looked away, embarrassed to be witnessing this public humiliation but unable to stop it. Near the television above the bar, a young doctor stood suddenly, his attention caught by something on the screen. PBS was playing a documentary, Medical Pioneers, the innovators who changed healthcare. But I was focused on Victoria, on her next words. My point, she said, building to her conclusion, is that we should be grateful tonight for the presence of people who actually matter. People whose contributions will be remembered. People who leave legacies that transcend their lifetimes. She raised her glass toward the crowd, deliberately excluding me from the toast. To excellence. To those who achieve it. And to knowing the difference between those who create history and those who merely witness it from the margins. The doctor near the TV was pointing now, his voice rising. Wait a minute. Wait just a minute. But Victoria was finishing her toast, triumphant. So thank you all for being here. That's Dr. Robert Chen, the young doctor shouted, his finger jabbing between the television screen and me. That's the Dr. Robert Chen. The room erupted in confused murmurs. Heads swiveled between the TV and the janitor holding a trash bag. Victoria's wine glass slipped from her fingers. It fell in slow motion, catching light from the chandelier before shattering against the marble floor in an explosion of crystal and chardonnay that sounded like breaking bones. Her face drained of all color as she stared at the television screen, where a much younger version of me stood in a white lab coat, surrounded by medical equipment and receiving an award from someone who looked suspiciously like the President of the United States. The young doctor's voice cut through the stunned silence. That's Dr. Robert Chen. The transplant immunologist. He was staring at the television screen where PBS was showing black and white footage of me 30 years younger, standing behind a podium at a medical conference. "You're mistaken," Victoria said, her voice shaking. "That's just. I'm not mistaken." The doctor pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. Dr. Robert Chen. Taiwanese immigrant. Former chief of transplant immunology at Massachusetts General Hospital. Other guests were reaching for their phones now, the room filling with the soft glow of screens and urgent whispered searches. The documentary narrator's voice drifted from the television. Dr. Chen's groundbreaking work in the 1990s revolutionized organ transplantation, creating protocols that are still used worldwide today. An older woman near the windows gasped. "Oh my God. I remember now. The Chen protocol. We studied it in medical school." "What protocol?" someone asked. The young doctor was reading from his phone, his voice growing stronger. "The Chen Protocol for Preventing Organ Rejection, published in 1994. Changed transplant medicine forever." Before his research, 60% of organ recipients died within 5 years from rejection. After his protocol, survival rates jumped to 85%. Senator Hayes stood slowly, recognition dawning on his distinguished face. "Robert Chen. You testified before the Senate Committee on Healthcare in 1996. Your research on organ transplant policy, my God, I remember you now." Dr. Patricia Reynolds, Dean of Harvard Medical School, was on her feet. "Dr. Chen. Robert? Is that really you?" I set down my custodial supplies and straightened my uniform. "Hello, Dr. Reynolds. It's been a long time. But you're..." She gestured at my janitor's uniform, confusion and disbelief warring on her face. "You're working here as maintenance staff." "I work as a custodian at Mass General. Night shift. Have for the past 8 years. The room erupted in confused murmurs. Victoria remained frozen at the head table, her shattered wine glass forgotten at her feet. Michael was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, shock, confusion, maybe the beginning of understanding. Judge Morrison rose from his table. Dr. Chen consulted on the medical ethics guidelines for experimental treatments. Our court still uses that framework for every healthcare case. The immunosuppressant regulations, another voice called out. You wrote those for the FDA in 1998. A hospital administrator I vaguely recognized stood. The Chen Transplant Pavilion at Mass General. We named it after you 15 years ago. It's one of the premier transplant centers in the country. Wait, Victoria finally found her voice. This can't be right. Michael's father is a janitor. He's nobody. He's one of the most influential medical researchers of the last 50 years, Dr. Reynolds interrupted, her tone ice-cold. His work has saved tens of thousands of lives. Maybe hundreds of thousands. The young doctor was still reading from his phone. Published 127 peer-reviewed papers. Received the National Medal of Science in 1998. Nominated for the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2001. Nominated for the Nobel Prize, someone breathed. His textbook Principles of Transplant Immunology is required reading in 200 medical schools worldwide, another guest added. Every transplant surgeon in America learns his protocols. Victoria's father, Dr. Richard Ashworth, had gone white as hospital sheets. He stood slowly, his hands gripping the table edge. Dr. Chen. Robert Chen. My God, I trained under your protocol. My entire career in thoracic surgery exists because of frameworks you created. The revelations were cascading now, each guest adding another piece to the puzzle of who I really was. A venture capitalist, the biotech boom of the late 90s, your research created entire industries. A pharmaceutical executive, the immunosuppressant drug market is worth billions annually. All based on scientific foundations you established. An MIT professor. Your cross-disciplinary work combining immunology with bioengineering opened completely new fields of study. I stood quietly near my custodial cart, watching Victoria's carefully constructed narrative dissolve like sugar in water. The insignificant janitor she'd publicly humiliated was someone whose work had literally shaped modern medicine, whose research had funded entire university departments, whose name was known to every doctor in the room. But why? Dr. Reynolds asked, moving toward me with tears in her eyes. Why are you working as a janitor? What happened? I met her gaze across the ballroom. My wife Lynn developed early onset Alzheimer's. I left my position to care for her full time. After she passed 3 years ago, I needed work that didn't require the mental energy research demanded. So I took a custodial position at the hospital where I'd once taught. The silence that followed was profound. 250 people processing the magnitude of what they just learned, and the magnitude of Victoria's error. Michael finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad? All these years, you never told me. You knew I worked at the hospital, son. I just didn't specify in what capacity. Does it matter? Does it matter? Victoria's voice was shrill with panic. You let everyone think you were nobody. You let me think. You never asked who I was, I interrupted quietly. You saw a janitor and decided that was all you needed to know. That was your choice, Victoria. Not mine. Dr. Reynolds approached me, her eyes bright with recognition and something like awe. Robert, your 1994 paper on T-cell mediation in transplant rejection, we still teach it to every first-year resident. It's foundational to modern immunology. Senator Hayes was scrolling through his phone, reading aloud. The Organ Transplant Success Act of 1996. My God, the entire legislative framework was based on your testimony. You convinced Congress to fund transplant research at levels we'd never seen before. A younger surgeon stood, his voice trembling with excitement. Every transplant I've ever performed used the Chen protocol. It's not optional, it's standard of care. You've been in the operating room with me for every single case, even though we'd never met. Victoria's face had gone from pale to gray. She gripped the edge of the table as the testimonials continued, each one another nail in the coffin of her arrogance. The International Transplant Guidelines, Judge Morrison added. You wrote those for the World Health Organization in 1997. 40 countries adopted them verbatim. A hospital administrator I'd never met personally stood. The Chen Endowment at Mass General funds 20 research fellowships annually. The work you donated to the hospital foundation. Wait, someone interrupted. He donated his work. The patents? All of them, the administrator confirmed. The Chen protocol was patented in 1994. Dr. Chen assigned all rights to the Mass General Hospital Foundation. Those patents have generated over $40 million in licensing fees over the years. Victoria's mother, Catherine, finally spoke, her Boston Brahmin composure cracking. 40 million. He gave away $40 million. The endowment funds transplant research, trains the next generation of immunologists, provides care for patients who can't afford anti-rejection medications, the administrator explained. Dr. Chen could have been extraordinarily wealthy. Instead, he chose to ensure his work served humanity. Michael was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Dad, you gave away a fortune. Money I didn't need to live comfortably, I replied. Money that could do more good funding research than sitting in my bank account. Dr. Richard Ashworth, Victoria's father, remained standing, his distinguished face twisted with shame. Dr. Chen, I need to say something. 20 years ago, I was a young thoracic surgeon attempting my first heart-lung transplant. The patient was rejecting. I called you at 3 a.m, and you talked me through modifying the immunosuppressant protocol for 6 hours. You saved that patient's life. His voice broke. You saved my career. And my daughter just called you insignificant in front of everyone who matters in Boston medicine. The room's attention swung back to Victoria, who looked like she wanted the marble floor to swallow her whole. The dot-com boom, a venture capitalist called out, still scrolling through his phone. Your work on technology transfer from medical research to commercial applications, you literally created the regulatory framework that allowed biotech startups to exist. Silicon Valley owes him, another tech executive added. The venture capital structures for medical technology, based on models Dr. Chen developed while consulting for the National Science Foundation. A patent attorney stood. I represent 3 of the largest pharmaceutical companies. Every immunosuppressant drug on the market was developed using scientific principles Dr. Chen established. We're talking about a $20 billion industry built on his foundational research. Victoria's carefully curated guest list, the senators and judges and CEOs she'd assembled to showcase her family's importance, were now falling over themselves to honor the janitor she'd humiliated. The irony was devastating in its completeness. Harvard's Department of Immunology, Dr. Reynolds continued. You trained 2 generations of researchers. 3 of your former students chair departments at major universities. Your academic tree includes over 200 physicians and scientists working worldwide. A young doctor near the back stood nervously. Dr. Chen, you probably don't remember me, but you were my dissertation advisor at Harvard in 1999. I'm heading the transplant program at Johns Hopkins now. Everything I know about immunology, I learned from you. More testimonials followed, each one revealing another layer of my influence. The young entrepreneur whose biotech company existed because of regulatory frameworks I'd designed. The medical ethicist whose entire field of study grew from committees I'd chaired. The hospital administrator whose transplant center used protocols I'd written. Even the wedding venue had a connection. The Fairmont's owner approached me quietly. Dr. Chen, my mother received a kidney transplant at Mass General in 1996. She lived another 20 years because of your protocol. She died last year, but those 20 years, she saw her grandchildren grow up. Thank you. Victoria stood isolated at the head table, her triumph turned to ash. Every person she'd invited to witness her social dominance was now celebrating the man she'd dismissed as worthless. Michael finally moved, walking away from his bride toward his father. Why didn't you tell me? All these years, I thought you were just a janitor. I finished gently. I am a janitor, Michael. That's honest work. But yes, I was also a researcher once. I made a choice to step away from that life to care for your mother. I've never regretted it. But you let Victoria think, you let her family think. I let them reveal who they really are, I said quietly. Character shows itself when people think you have nothing to offer them. Victoria showed me hers. Victoria stood shakily, her designer gown rustling in the silence. Crystal shards from her shattered wine glass crunched under her heels as she moved toward me. Dr. Chen, I had no idea. Michael never told me about your background. You never asked, I replied quietly. You saw the uniform and decided you knew everything about me. That's not fair. How was I supposed to know? You weren't supposed to know, Michael interrupted, his voice hard. You were supposed to treat my father with respect regardless of what he did for a living. That's what decent people do. Victoria turned to him, desperation creeping into her voice. Michael, I was trying to protect you. To protect your future in my family's circles. I thought. You thought wrong. Michael's face was flushed with anger I'd rarely seen in my gentle son. You offered my father $50,000 not to come to our wedding. The gasp from the crowd was audible. Victoria's parents both stood, her mother's hand flying to her pearls. You did what? Dr. Ashworth's voice was thunder. I was protecting our family's reputation, Victoria said, her voice rising defensively. I didn't know who he was. If he'd just told me, none of this would have happened. If you'd been a decent human being, none of this would have happened, Michael shot back. You humiliated my father in front of 250 people because you judged him by his job title. I stepped forward, placing a hand on Michael's shoulder. Son, don't. This is your wedding day. A wedding where my wife just called my father insignificant. His voice broke. Where she tried to pay you to stay away. Where she gave a speech about natural hierarchies while you emptied trash cans. Victoria was crying now, mascara streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't understand. If I'd known you were somebody important. Stop, I said, the word cutting through her apology. Don't you see? That's the problem. I shouldn't have to be somebody important for you to treat me with basic dignity. The fact that you're only sorry now that you know my credentials tells me everything I need to know about your character. She flinched like I'd slapped her. Around us, 250 witnesses watched the moral lesson unfold in real time. I left behind awards and recognition because my wife needed me, I continued. I chose to spend 3 years feeding her, bathing her, reading to her as Alzheimer's stole her mind. You called that never accomplishing anything of significance. I call it the most important work I ever did. I was wrong, Victoria whispered. I was so wrong about everything. Yes, you were. But not because I used to be a doctor. You were wrong because you looked at another human being doing honest work and decided they were beneath you. That's not a mistake, Victoria. That's who you are. Senator Hayes approached slowly. Dr. Chen, I think everyone here owes you an apology. We've all been guilty of not noticing the people who serve us. You've taught us something valuable tonight. I didn't come here to teach lessons, I replied. I came to see my son get married. That's all I ever wanted. Michael was crying now, tears streaming down his face. Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have defended you the moment she started that speech. I should have stopped her. You were in an impossible position. Your loyalty was divided between your wife and your father. I understand. No. Michael shook his head firmly. There was no division. My loyalty should have been clear. You raised me alone. You sacrificed everything for me. And I sat there silent while she destroyed you. He turned to Victoria, his voice cold. We need to talk. Privately. Now. Victoria nodded mutely, following him toward a side room. Her parents trailed behind, both looking 20 years older than they had an hour ago. Dr. Ashworth paused beside me. Dr. Chen, I don't know what to say. My daughter's behavior tonight was unforgivable. The irony is, I built my career on protocols you designed. Everything I've accomplished in thoracic surgery exists because of your groundwork. Your daughter made assumptions based on limited information. We all do that sometimes. The question is what she learns from this. Still, he said quietly. To offer you money to stay away from your own son's wedding. I'm ashamed. The guests began moving again, the spell of the revelation breaking. Several approached me with handshakes and words of respect, but the celebration felt hollow now. Victoria's cruelty had poisoned the evening irreparably. Dr. Reynolds stood beside me. What will you do now? Surely you won't go back to custodial work after this? Why not? It's honest work. The job doesn't define me, I define the job. But Robert, the hospital would reinstate you in research. We need your expertise on the new transplant protocols we're developing. I appreciate that. But I've grown to like the quiet of night shifts. The simplicity. After years of high-pressure research and then years of caring for Lynn, there's peace in work that doesn't follow me home. She studied my face. You really mean that? I really do. Though I might consider part-time consulting if it helps the next generation. Just not full-time research. That chapter of my life is closed. Michael emerged from the side room alone, his face drawn. He walked straight to me and embraced me tightly. "I'm so proud to be your son. Not because you're Dr. Robert Chen. Because you're the man who chose family over fame, who chose love over legacy. Your mother and I always chose you first. That never changed. Victoria wants to apologize again. Properly this time. Does she understand why she needs to apologize?" Michael nodded. "I think tonight taught her something she should have learned long ago. That worth isn't measured by titles or money or social standing. It's measured by character." Victoria returned to the ballroom, her makeup repaired but her eyes red and swollen. She approached me with tentative steps, no longer the confident bride who'd commanded the room an hour earlier. "Dar. Chen, may I speak with you?" Her voice was small, stripped of its earlier arrogance. I nodded, and we moved to a quieter corner while guests pretended not to watch. "I owe you an apology that goes beyond words," she began. "What I said tonight was cruel and ignorant. But Michael helped me understand something. I'm not sorry because you're Dr. Robert Chen. I'm sorry because what I said was wrong regardless of who you are. That's the first honest thing you've said to me." She flinched but continued. "I grew up in a world where pedigree and position were everything. Where people were valued by their last names and bank accounts. I thought that's how the world worked. Tonight you showed me how shallow that worldview is. What will you do with that knowledge? I don't know yet. But I know I need to be better. Michael deserves better." She paused. "Will you stay? Please. Not as the janitor, but as father of the groom. It's where you should have been all along." I looked at my son, who stood nearby with hope and anxiety warring on his face. "Let me change out of this uniform." 20 minutes later, I returned in the suit I'd brought, joining Michael and Victoria at the head table. The guests erupted in spontaneous applause, a standing ovation that felt different from the one before. This one carried warmth rather than shock. The reception continued, but transformed. People approached me throughout the evening, not as supplicants to a legend, but as humans connecting with another human. Young doctors asked about my research. Hospital administrators discussed transplant programs. Senator Hayes talked about his granddaughter's kidney transplant, tears in his eyes as he thanked me. Dr. Ashworth found me near midnight. "My daughter called you insignificant in front of Boston's most influential people. By tomorrow morning, this story will be in every medical school, every hospital, every boardroom in New England." I didn't intend for that to happen. But it did. And Victoria will carry the weight of this error for a long time. She's young. Hopefully she'll learn from it. He paused. "For what it's worth, I spoke with Mass General's director. They'd like to offer you a position on the hospital's research advisory board. Part-time, your own schedule. They need your guidance on the new transplant wing expansion." "I'll consider it. Thank you." As the evening wound down, Michael pulled me onto the dance floor. "This was supposed to be the mother-son dance," he said quietly. "But Mom's not here. Would you dance with me instead?" My throat tightened. "Your mother would have loved this. All of it. Even the difficult parts. She would have been proud of you tonight. Standing there in that uniform, taking Victoria's abuse with such dignity. That took strength I don't know if I have. You have it, son. You showed it when you confronted Victoria. When you chose truth over social comfort." We danced slowly, father and son, while guests watched with tears in their eyes. This was what Victoria's money couldn't buy, the bond between a father who'd sacrificed everything and a son who finally understood the depth of that sacrifice. Dr. Reynolds approached as the dance ended. "Robert, I meant what I said. Harvard would welcome you back for guest lectures. Share your journey with medical students, not just the science, but the choices you made. They need to understand that success isn't just about publications and awards. Maybe I will." After I finish my night shifts this week. I smiled at her expression. I'm not quitting my custodial job. I like the work. It keeps me humble. You're returning to mopping floors after tonight? Why not? The floors still need mopping. The restrooms still need cleaning. Someone has to do it, and I'm good at my job. Governor Walsh overheard and laughed. Dr. Chen, you might be the only person in Massachusetts who could tell the governor that mopping floors is noble work and make me believe it. All honest work is noble, Governor. That's what my parents taught me when I arrived here 40 years ago with nothing. As guests departed, many stopped to shake my hand, their respect now genuine rather than obligatory. Victoria's carefully orchestrated networking event had become something else entirely, a lesson in humility that Boston's elite wouldn't soon forget. Victoria stood with Michael at the exit, thanking guests. I watched her face as each person left. Some offered congratulations with pointed coldness, others expressed sympathy for her public humiliation. She was learning what it felt like to be judged and found wanting. Michael walked me to my car near midnight. Dad, stay at my place tonight. Don't go back to Cambridge alone. I'm fine, son. I have a shift tomorrow night. Need to rest. Your night shift. At the hospital where you used to run the transplant department. He shook his head in wonder. How do you do it? How do you stay so humble? Humility isn't something you achieve, Michael. It's something you choose. Every day. Your mother taught me that. I drove home through empty Boston streets, past the grand buildings where I'd once given lectures and the modest apartment where I'd raised my son alone. Tomorrow I'd return to my custodial cart and quiet night shifts, unchanged by tonight's revelations. The floors would still need mopping. And I would still be the same man who chose love over legacy. Underscore 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 underscore. If you're watching this and you're in your 50s, 60s, or beyond, listen closely. This story is for you. Your value is not determined by your current circumstances or job title. I was the same man in a lab coat receiving the National Medal of Science as I was in a custodian's uniform emptying trash cans. The work changed. My character didn't. My accomplishments didn't disappear because I chose a different path. Real success is measured by who you show up for when no one's watching. I gave up prestige and awards to sit with my wife as Alzheimer's stole her mind, one memory at a time. I'd make that choice again every single day. Those 3 years caring for Lynn mattered more than any Nobel Prize nomination or research paper ever could. When Victoria called me insignificant in front of Boston's elite, she revealed her own character, not mine. True dignity comes from how you treat others, especially those you believe are beneath you. I maintained my composure not because I had something to prove, but because I had nothing to prove. My worth wasn't up for debate. We live in a world obsessed with credentials and titles, where people measure success by the size of your house or the prestige of your employer. But at the end of your life, no one remembers your job title. They remember how you made them feel, who you loved, what you sacrificed for family. My immigrant parents taught me that all honest work is honorable work, regardless of title. I cleaned hospitals where wings were named after me and felt no shame. Work doesn't define you, you define the work. The janitor who takes pride in clean floors has more dignity than the executive who demeans the people who serve him. Victoria learned what many entitled people never learn: character trumps credentials every time. She assembled a room full of senators and judges to showcase her family's importance, only to discover that the worthless janitor had accomplished more than everyone in that ballroom combined. The irony was perfect, the lesson unforgettable. Here's what I want you to understand: if someone judges you by your current circumstances, they're revealing their own limitations, not yours. If someone treats you differently after learning your credentials, they never respected you in the first place, they respected your resume. I have no regrets about choosing Lynn over career advancement. That choice defined my life's real success. The 3 years I spent caring for her, feeding her, reading to her as she forgot my name, those years mattered more than 15 years of groundbreaking research. Love is the only legacy that truly endures. When people ask why I returned to custodial work after that wedding, I tell them the truth: the floors still needed mopping, and I'm good at my job. Humility isn't something you achieve once and forget. It's something you choose every single day, in every interaction, regardless of who's watching. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that your true worth can never be diminished by someone else's ignorance or cruelty, please subscribe to this channel. Every week I share real stories about dignity, family, and the triumph of character over circumstance. Hit that subscribe button and share this with anyone who needs to remember their own value. In the comments, tell me, have you ever been judged unfairly based on your job or circumstances? How did you maintain your dignity? Your story might inspire someone who needs to hear it today. Next time, I'll share how my son's business partner tried to institutionalize me to steal my medical patents. The greed was staggering, but the justice was even more satisfying. Click the box on your screen to watch that story now. Remember, true greatness isn't about the titles you hold or the awards you win. It's about who you are when the titles are stripped away, when no one's watching, when there's nothing to gain from doing the right thing except the knowledge that you did it. That's the legacy that matters. That's the success that endures. Thank you for listening. And never forget, your worth is inherent, not earned. No one can take it from you unless you give it away.